All right, good morning again from Silicon Valley. This is Marco Marinucci from Mind the Bridge. Today we have the pleasure to have with us an ex-colleague of mine, Uttam Tripachi from Google. Uttam, good to see you.
Marco, good to see you as well. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. And Uttam actually has a couple of roles there. So reading from your profile, LinkedIn profile, you're both head of global developer programs at Google and also the head of the American ecosystem and Startup Accelerators. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we have two hats. One of them is how can we scale our global community efforts, developer community efforts, driving awareness, education, adoption, feedback around all the Google developer products that we have, from Android to TensorFlow to web to Google Cloud Platform. And then the second part of the team really focuses on the American ecosystem, so US and Canada and Latin America. And within that, one of our flagship effort is all the accelerator programs that we run. So those are the two hats I wear.
It must be very busy because those, both areas are, I think, particularly relevant for Google. Maybe we can start from that. So why is Google? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? In particular on a development area, development program. So maybe we can start from that. So which kind of activities you normally run to kind of develop also links and ecosystems of developers in different parts of the world, and what is your role there?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. And you have been at Google, so I think for someone like you, it will probably be very straightforward. Google is in the business of digital ecosystems. So the stronger digital ecosystems worldwide actually helps Google business long term. Well, and that's why a lot of efforts around bringing businesses online and efforts around that have been foundational. The two efforts that my group focuses on, the first one, again, like actually let me start from the startup accelerator side. So Google for almost 2 decades or around that time has had efforts of investing in startups. We had Google Ventures, Google Capital, now Gradient Ventures that invests in companies. But one of the things that was lacking a few years ago, or we found as a gap, is engagement with early stage startups from a tech feedback perspective, from understanding their use cases, how our developer products can get better for them. And this was the genesis of why we thought of launching an accelerator program. The intent there was not from an investment perspective. Our accelerator programs are free of cost and no equity changes hand. But the intent there was, if Google has to grow as a company that is a top choice for developers and builders to consider as they are thinking of building their applications and solutions, how can we continue to innovate? Right? So that was why the accelerator program started. And the same also applies to our developer community programs, because there are almost 20 to 30 million developers worldwide. A good chunk of them use Google's developer products, but it's also a very competitive environment. And I think if anything, last 1 year has demonstrated that with the advent of AI, and there are more choices available for developers, which keeps us humble, honestly, and on our toes on continuing to innovate. That's why more effort around both of these areas. And I'm happy to talk about either one of them in detail. I know that's something.
Yeah. So obviously, also for our audience, the startup side is more relevant.
Yes.
But let's cover first the other one so we can get out of the way, because I'm intrigued, in particular when you said with the new waves of AI, even the role of developers, right, and programmers overall. The world is a different place in the last couple of years. And so, what do you guys normally do? What is your What is your KPI? You know that everything at Google is driven by KPI OKRs. What are the OKRs on the developer relationship sides, and then your interpretation. What do you think is going to happen to try to engage, the right audience?
Yeah. So at Google, when it comes to our developer relations and developer work, our OKR is not tied around revenue, which actually is good, and it really helps us to take a little bit more medium to long term view. There are other parts of company, and company as a whole, of course, revenue is important. But when we're thinking of building programs, products for developers, taking a little bit more medium term view helps us create solutions. So let me take as an example, like this year has been all around AI, generative AI, and then as part of that, we had things like Palm APIs getting rolled out. Of course, we had version of BART going out early in the year. And when it comes to developer relations, the exercise starts from building awareness. Do more and more developers know that your platform or your API exists? Once that step is met, then you move into the education phase where you want them to go through the test, the curriculum, the certification, so that they are ready to start using your API and platform. The stage after that is adoption, where you learn what exists, you try to learn it, and now you're ready to start using it. As part of that whole journey, there's of course going to be feedback, and a good developer relations organization, developer programs team has that two-way channel where we are not just sharing externally, but bringing the voice of developers within the company, bringing it to the product team so that it could be part of the future roadmap. All of this is something that the team does. Now, for each product, we might be focusing on different areas. Like for product A, the focus might be more on awareness building, but for product B, it might be more around adoption or education. Because at Google, as I said, like there are multiple developer clouds that we are trying to support, which also is important from a staying agile mindset. Like we can't execute the same template year over year. The market dynamics shift and change. Uh, but around AI, a lot of our focus has actually been from awareness building to education to adoption to also feedback, given the
Hmm.
pace of how everything is moving. And that's where we are moving ahead. This is also an area which humbles you constantly, given the nature of what developers are creating, and how can you continue to stay up with their needs.
I wonder if so you've been doing this for a number of years. In terms of engagement with different regional hubs, is this process evolved over time, or kind of the hubs of developers where you guys are engaging are is kind of similar over time?
So I have been in developer relations for a little over 10 years now, right? And to your question, the hubs have largely remained the same. But what has changed, because 10 years plus is a long time, the size of those hubs and the growth trajectory of those hubs have significantly shifted or changed. And a couple of examples, if you look at the growth of developer landscape in places like Nigeria, in Brazil, much steeper growth trajectory compared to places like US or Western Europe. US, of course, still is the number one developer market, but some of these other countries are growing at a much steeper pace, much faster rate. The same goes is true for places like India. China is a slightly different developer landscape, which is a little bit more like inward looking, but from a size perspective has also grown. And in a lot of our work, we do focus on developer hubs. Our team is also regionally distributed. We try to be where the developers are, so we can run the programs on the ground. So yeah, in some way, like the hubs have largely remained the same, but their sizes have evolved.
Hmm.
Which
Right.
when you take a forward-looking view, then you change a lot of your resourcing decisions and where you want to invest more versus less.
Interesting. Do you use what incentives are you creating today, 2023, for early developers to start using Google tools?
So a lot of our incentives focuses on how can we help developers be successful. Like if you're a developer or even a small startup with say two or three people, you don't want to worry about scalability. You don't want to worry about security. You don't want to worry about like uh, going to market quickly and having a lot of technical understanding of building the solution. You just want to solve for a problem, right? Like, and the promise that we try to put in from Google's perspective is if you're using things like GCP, you quickly get started building on the same stack that exists and that powers Google's own products, right? So you are getting the best in class security, scalability, localization, internationalization, all of those things, right? And I think that's a strong incentive for anyone who's trying to build a solution, go out there and quickly scale. The other piece is trying to anchor our solutions around technologies that will that it's not that technology will just go away overnight. So if you invest 6 months or a year learning a new programming language, but uh, the uses of that programming language within other developer products or platforms is not as strong, your chances of getting stuck with that is very high. So a lot of our focus is on building solutions that get recognized as industry standards, and that's where a lot of work with open source communities as well. So a developer looking to build with Google, our promise is we are invested in helping you be successful in what you're trying to do, because your long-term success translates into Google's long-term success. And as part of that, helping you get out what you're looking to build, rather than get stuck in like worrying about scalability,
Yeah.
security, AI tools, all of those pieces.
Got it. Perfect. And I think is a good segue into the next chapter. I mean, one of the potential successes of some of the developers is that they build a company
Yes.
around an idea and a product. So here comes your second hat as a head of America's startup accelerators. So those are specifically for people that are entrepreneurs, right? So I'm not sure to what stage of development do you expect people in the different programs that might have different rules. So maybe you can give kind of an overview of all the different today 2023 programs that Google has. And I remember again when I was still at Google, there was a kind of the seed of Google for entrepreneurs that
Yeah.
became Google for startups. So I mean, it goes way back when, right? These programs and support of the new waves of entrepreneurs. So give us a flavor of really the focus on the current sets of accelerators at Google.
Yeah, and as you very rightly put, like this has been part of Google's DNA from the very beginning. Like, how can we stay engaged with the startup ecosystem, with the entrepreneurs, and we can support them, right? Like, support them in their own growth journey, because a much bigger digital ecosystem that's growing and thriving is actually useful, right? It's beneficial for a company like Google. And within that lens, as I talked earlier, a lot of our startup accelerator program, again, like it's not primarily driven around investment goals. It's not primarily driven around equity changing hands, but the intent there is how can we help the next wave of entrepreneurs be successful on Google's platform? How can we help them build what they're trying to build using Google? A lot of our own focus there is learning, so being humble, because typically what happens is an entrepreneur will test your platform and push the envelope a lot more than an enterprise developers, because they are operating under various constraints, right? So they're gonna really stress test your product, which is great, because then that feedback helps us inform our products going forward. Within US specifically, like which is one of the markets that I oversee, we also run programs that focuses our accelerator program that focuses on underrepresented groups, because it's what's true universally in a sense is certain segments have underrepresentation when it comes to growth of digital ecosystem. And if you're looking to build a fairer future than what exists today, we need to really provide more resources, more support in certain areas. That's where we have programs like our Black Founders Accelerator, our Women Founders Accelerator, both of them
Latino founders I've seen.
Latino Founder Accelerator that we are working on, and a lot of that is really around creating more opportunities. We also have a lot of new effort around sustainability and climate change, which is a topic which is getting relevance worldwide, to be honest. And if anything, this summer, you are talking about our travels. I was in India and you were in Europe. And you are starting to see that the changes that climate change is creating around us, right? Like, so it's something a lot of builders are also thinking about, and how can we make Google's resources available to solve problems around that. Our accelerator programs are cohort based, so it's typically a 6 months cohort. We have open applications followed by interviews and selection. A typical cohort consists of 15 startups, and the program runs. We have an onboarding, getting started week, and then startups continue to work on the solutions, and then we have closing sessions followed by demo day. Uh, the other thing that startups get as part of the accelerator program is access to Google mentors and industry mentors. It's a list of highly curated mentors that we work with. It ranges from technology areas to go to market, and all of those pieces. The sweet spot for a successful startup to benefit most from our accelerator program is somewhere around Series A. So either just before pre-Series A or post-Series A is where we feel that the startups get the most value, and that's where the program is optimized for. And in each for each of the accelerator, then we have 3 or 4 other specific criterias. Like for example, in certain ones we may want to focus on, for example, fintech startups or healthcare startups. So typically each cohort also comes with a flavor. But the best place to get started would be if you go to developers.google.com/community. That's where you can start learning about all of our developer programs, but also the accelerator programs, and dive down into each of the specific ones.
And the accelerator, since you're giving plugs away here, is startup.google.com/accelerator. I see
Yeah,
here that's
that's the
listed.
other link through which you can navigate. But to developers.google.com/community, you can also navigate through there. So
Oh, got it,
we
got
have
it.
made the
Okay,
discovery slightly easier.
okay, got it. Is this specifically for developers, founders, or is that obviously I think to a common denominator there is that I guess the development framework. But do you expect the founders to be a developer as well, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. Like we do expect someone in the founding team would be technical, because a lot of our, and this is where Google we think we can add most value. If your startup is technology focused, or technology is really powering what you're trying to build as a startup or as a company, that's where we can bring a lot of value. If you're running a startup and you have nothing to do with technology, you don't use technology at all in your solution, etc., we may not be able to add the most value. But having said that, your startup doesn't need to be developer focused. Right? Like you need to be using technology, developer platforms to build a solution, and that's where we see most of the use cases coming in. Uh, a, a, a majority of our startups that get selected into the cohort have, for example, a CTO, but they will have very often a CEO that's non-technical, but that really is passionate about going to go to market or business or partnerships, and that's majority cases.
Those are a rolling basis, right? So maybe you can talk about the process. How long does it take, right, to be selected, and again, if there are big differences between from program to a program in terms of also are you giving grants away, or is mostly support and free mentoring using the large mentors from Google?
Yeah, so few few questions there to unpack. The first one is yes. So a lot of our accelerators are operating on a rolling basis. For an individual one, we do have those stages. So we have open applications, followed by selection, followed by onboarding. Uh, right now in across Americas, we have approximately 10 accelerators going on. So some of them might be in open application stage, some of them might be in the ongoing cohort stage, some of them might be getting ready for graduation or demo day, right? Like, and that's how we try to load balance the entire year. Also the effort of the team and how we are trying to support multiple accelerators. But for each one of them, what we try to do is the websites that you referenced earlier, and then hopefully put the link as part of this video as well, and also on the podcast. Folks can go there, and we keep it very updated in terms of which cohort is currently accepting applications. We typically try to give 4 to 6 weeks of open application where folks can submit their interest, and then we take it to the next stage of filtering and selection. In terms of the incentives, we don't do grants. We did used to do grants for our very first accelerators in 2014-15. And the feedback that we heard from the community is like, grant is good, but honestly, a lot of startups and founders were getting the value through the program itself, and then the fact that they're part of a Google accelerator made their journey of raising funds elsewhere a lot more easier. For us, grants was becoming a constraint in scaling because every new accelerator that we had to start, or then we had to go and ask for more budget. But as soon as when we realized, okay, this is not the most important thing for the founders, but it's help is kind of preventing us scale. So we ran few accelerators without grant, and the feedback actually was almost the same. So a lot of value that we try to provide, again, like the best of Google in terms of resources, connections, access to technology, the program and curriculum itself. The core group and the peer group that gets formed is also very useful for a lot of these startups.
Mm.
We also try to stay in touch after the program. So it's not that the cohort is over and you don't hear from us anymore. We try to stay in touch with startups after the program itself and help them navigate if they need anything.
Yeah, and I, can testify because you've been one of the mentors and nice mentors of some of our programs, and really, there is a genuine interest in maintaining, a channel open with the multiple then routes within Google, right? Because now Google has become, for actually quite some time, a galaxy, right? It is somewhat difficult to navigate, so it's always good to have an entry point that can help you guide through the navigation of different units, different even companies now within Alphabet, if not products from within. I would like to pick your brain now, kind of a looking forward. Also, you based on the experience of the probably thousands of entrepreneurs you've been talking to, what does it take for, in particular, a region and policymakers to create the right incentives and the right elements to be thriving in terms of the amount of innovation that can come or being attracting as a result of policies. So this is a wider discussions that goes over our heads, both of us. We as Mind the Bridge, we've been focusing on that actually a little bit more significantly in the last few years. We do actually have a program that is called the Startup Ecosystem Stars, really to recognize the best practices among the different government organizations, able to push for more, what we call outbound and inbound innovation. So both to be able to export the best projects and innovation in different regions, and to attract talent, both human talent and sometimes resources. So I wonder if across the regions that you deal with, if you have a few ideas now of a few examples of some of those policies that then been translated into things that have a real impact in the local economy. And obviously, as part of that conversation, we want to talk about India, because that's where you're just back from, and I'm sure a lot of those examples are coming from there. But maybe let's generalize 1 second, and then we can go down to India.
Yeah, no, happy to talk about that. So as part of my career journey so far, again, like I grew up in India, worked initially there. Actually, I think I mentioned to you, I lived in Europe as well for almost a year, not in stretch, but in different fragments. I was in Switzerland working
In
as
Zurich.
university, uh, 30 minutes just south of Zurich in origin, but Zurich was like just 30 minutes away by train. So in that German-speaking region of Switzerland as well. There, my role was a researcher in a university, but kind of you get an exposure of how the ecosystem is there and how things are moving. And then last 10 plus years here in the Valley, one of the things, and I actually start with the Valley first, and then we can shift maybe to India to your conversation. I think what makes a place like Silicon Valley so unique is the amalgamation of multiple things. Right? I think this is one of the few places of such high talent density that exists right now on the planet, right? Like, and therefore, it's not by serendipity that when there is breakthrough innovation that happens in any new area, and this year has been all about generative AI, it comes from place like a place like Silicon Valley. It's not serendipity; it's by design or by structure of how this place exists. And the factors there is like you have top universities that are in this vicinity. If you go from Stanford to University of California, Berkeley, which is really creating talent, right? Like it's creating a lot of ideas that get created in those spaces. Then you have a lot of role models, a lot of successful entrepreneurs who call this place home, and who are very active in giving back, but also investing and staying active in the ecosystem. Of course, it's great from fundraising and capital perspective, but also it's great in terms of that mindset that gets created of risk taking, and young founders, then they see role models around them, encourages them. And then finally, if you are a startup that's starting to be successful, this high talent density that has been created by companies like Sun Microsystem and Google and Meta and others just gives you abundant talent to hire from. So it's not that you can't scale. Like, you can literally scale to any size just by staying within Silicon Valley, right? So I think that ecosystem makes a place like Silicon Valley unique. I know many local authorities, governments around the world try to replicate. Okay, can we have our own small Silicon Valley? But these three or four factors have also a network effect attached to them, which makes it incredibly hard to replicate the whole thing. But you can do it in pieces, and it's maybe a journey, right? Like, you will see the first wave of entrepreneurs in any region probably have the hardest time, because they're trying to change the cultural mindset of that environment. They're trying to create new frameworks of structures of support of startup ecosystem, make it more acceptable, risk taking wise. Uh, But then the next wave kind of stands on their laurels, and they
On the
benefit
shoulders, yeah. Yeah,
from
but
their
don't you think that a change in a mindset though is the hardest thing, right? Sometimes it takes a generation of successes, right? It's not something you can change from one day to the next.
exactly. And the benefit, I think, for the last 3 or 4 decades is globalization is making it easier for people to discover success cases from elsewhere, so that pollination of ideas is becoming easier. But you're exactly right, like, some of this cultural mindset takes forever to change. And I think this is what's going to the India piece. I think this is where, since India got independence in 1947, the first wave of generation, or the first couple of generation, was actually coming out from a colonial mindset, where for hundreds of years India was a British colony, and you get trained to live in a certain way where you have to be compliant, and a government job is probably the safest thing if you land into that. And if you try
Follow
to
rules, right? Is not to
just
break
follow the
them.
rules, and
Mm.
just live with that, right? Like, and also scarcity, right? Like, scarcity kind of comes in your mind. uh, but then you have a breakthrough moment, which starts to unleash things, and then that the snowball effect hopefully catches up.
Yeah, so I saw your blog post, recent blog post. That you just back from a couple of months in India, probably the longest for definitely pre-COVID time, from post-COVID time. But and you sounded very bullish in where India's headed in terms of the ecosystem of startups. What do you think is now, right? Because we've been talking about the wave of outsourcing as what 20, 30 years back. The IT development places like Bangalore is not new at all. So what do you think is different now that wasn't already there 20 years ago?
Yeah. So first, you're exactly right. Like, I think this was the longest I've been in India after the pandemic. And one of the things I realized in the first few weeks, or I was noticing, is a unique set of optimism that was just around. Right? Like, of course, it's India's in this build mode, a lot of infrastructure coming up. You go around in places like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, or even tier two cities like Indore or Gurgaon, which is not Gurgaon is actually tier one, but even in tier two cities like Indore, you see this palpable excitement that people
Hmm.
are building and creating. And I was trying to just check myself. Is it just me who's noticing it? And then I talked to a bunch of peers, many of them who are, again, like, in the same phase, haven't traveled to India for 3 4 years and then traveled. And then I came across this LinkedIn post by Mani Gupta, who used to be at Google, and right now is in a very senior role at Microsoft. And he posted the same thing, right? Like, so I said, okay, this is a phenomena that many others are noticing. And you are exactly right. I think India's journey, those of you who are familiar, 1991 was India's almost getting to that brink moment where the country was almost going bankrupt. They had to really put up a lot of their gold on to raise money. You have to give away your gold to raise money to really give enough runway for the country to survive and continue the imports. And the moment that changed after that is India just embraced globalization, so starting to open the markets for international investments to come in. This was the first time I think where a lot of Indian generation that was growing up at that point of time started to feel, okay, like what opportunities lay outside of the shores of the country. This is the same time when companies like Infosys were starting to scale their business and the globalization movement. But what's changing now, more specifically, is the shift from services, IT services to IT products.
Hmm.
A lot more Indian entrepreneurs are looking to build product-based startups than services-based startup. The Indian economy in the last 20 to 30 years has also, again, it's not in the size of US economy, it's probably 6 to 7 times smaller, probably 10 times smaller, but it's sizable enough that you can think of building a product for the local ecosystem, local market. You can raise money for that, and you can even attain a status of being a unicorn. So India, for example, when I left in 2014, had two unicorns. Last year, India had 100 unicorns, and they added three or four more this year. So going from like two unicorns to 100 unicorns, I think last year, just from the size of the startup ecosystem, now the third largest startup ecosystem on the planet, which is pointing to all of these factors of a massive build moment that's coming along, which is something that you notice. I think that optimism that people carry around is also uh, very contagious, because
Yeah.
that's
And
yeah.
back to the mindset that we mentioned before, when you feel an environment that is contagious, clearly those are the topical moments where things can really shift and change. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the trajectory is what matters, and now the feeling is that the economy as really plays as a potential third largest economy in the world, coming up with China having some troubles. All the eyes are now on India, and rightly so.
Yeah, I think the forecast is India to become the third largest economy over the next 3 to 5 years, right? Like which again, for the size of the country, probably is again, like, India is also the large. Has the highest population now, so it's
Mm.
also, we have to balance it with that. I think around optimism, the point that you make is, if a large section of your ecosystem thinks that the future is going to be better than the present, that brings the element of optimism. That makes it easier for you to motivate your employees, your team members to create. And to be candid with you, I think the Western economies have been missing that a little bit for a
Yeah,
variety of reasons, right? So that, I think that adds to a massive tailwind
yeah.
where things are moving.
And we can talk about what is happening today, because I mean the SoftBank and the Tata Global of the world, I think they made a Sequoia as well, by the way, that then spun off, made some push into the India market. With 2023 is a total different year, so maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about that a little bit, and to also balance out the big excitement and now also reality check that is happening around the world with most of the funding, at minimums, slowing down by a significant amount.
Yeah. So what happened during the pandemic years, and this is where economies like India has benefited with the focus around remote work, and you can literally work from anywhere. I know a number of my friends in India who were actually, like, through the pandemic till last year, were not sitting in Bangalore. They were sitting in their hometown in a tier two and a three city, working for a US company or a US client, making like almost a US salary. And this is again like the fact of globalization and the new models that were possible with the pandemic, and more acceptability for things like remote work, etc. Now, and the other thing that you mentioned, some of those VC companies, what also has shifted is each of these companies now have local offices in places like Bangalore, Mumbai, Hyderabad, National Capital Region. So if a startup founder is trying to raise fund, they don't have to fly all the way to Silicon Valley.
Mm.
They actually talk to Sequoia, SoftBank folks in the local ecosystem. You take a flight to Bangalore, go and have a meeting, makes it easier for you to get going on those conversations. Now, what has happened in the last couple of years, and you're seeing this worldwide, but gets more amplified in regions with high growth trajectory, is I think there was there was high valuations that got created, a lot of fear of missing out led to investors really running after startups with their checks, and that correction started last year. First half of this year continued. But what I'm also noticing is in a lot of startups, like in their founders, like for example, Zomato, who came out there with their earnings a few months ago, and Paytm, are taking pride that they are focusing on profitability. So the
Finally, yeah.
conversation around profitability is taking center stage, because so far it was all around like growth. You capture the market, and then once you have good size, then you'll worry
Yeah.
about profitability. But that sanity is also returning, and I think that's good. So some froth gets created, and it leads to a little bit more healthy ecosystem.
Got it. So same thing that is happening here, by the way, in any other developed ecosystem where there was a lot of excitement, a couple of years ago. Now there's this sanity that is getting through. Last question is about the back to the policies. I know that you think that the special economic zones policies that happen around India is something that has benefited the ecosystems. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So special economic zones, when I first, or the first time I read about them, they were experimented with in China, like in late 70s, early 80s, when China was trying to develop itself as a manufacturing hub. Special economic zones were created as these physical locations where if you set businesses over there, you get tax incentives, and you get preferential treatment also from permitting, setting up the business, registering everything. And I think it has contributed to China's success to a large extent from growing from a manufacturing hub. So India adopted this policy in 2000, and started to really focus. Initial phase was focusing on special economic zones around IT companies
Mhm.
and software companies. I think that has helped to a large extent attracting investments, because in some cases you get these 10-year tax holidays. So if you set up a company in a particular physical location, in addition to cutting through all the red tape, you don't have to go through like multiple offices to get your business going. It's a little bit more streamlined effort, but financially you get this window where you can actually it's a financial incentive for you. And then after that, once you have developed a footprint from a policy perspective, the way policymakers think is then it's going to be harder for you to switch, right?
Right.
So if that ecosystem is working for you, you'll hopefully continue and the ecosystem thrives. I think places like Bangalore have benefited. Hyderabad has benefited. More recently, Google talked about setting up one of our offices in Gandhinagar, one of our fintech offices there in a place called Gift City that's coming up. Again, one of the special economic zones that's coming up over there. So, and there's also research around how special economic zones is not a solution for everything, but to
Mhm.
a large extent, I think it has helped Indian ecosystem. And now there's a lot of focus within the country on special economic zones around manufacturing, because that's the other area the country wants to grow in. So I personally think that has helped uh, both China and in India in terms of the growth journey and where they're moving. So something for policymakers in other countries to look at. Okay, like how does this work? Will this attract investment, businesses to our country? Where does it make sense? So other conversation, there's equity. You don't want to set up an SEZ in a place which is already thriving. Rather, like, do you want to spread it out a little bit? So that's again a consideration for policymakers.
Excellent. Listen, Uttam, so thanks for all your insights. Thanks for being value partners of ours and a good friend, and to be always available for startups and developers. So, uh, do you want to give a place where people can find you? Is that LinkedIn the best option?
The best, yeah. LinkedIn, Twitter, super active there, so folks can find me there, and happy to connect. Also, thanks Marco for being an amazing partner over the years and in this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. All right. Take care. See you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.